What is going on? This is the Matt Bernier Show on DRFTV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, Daily Racing Form's Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Form's Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition. Taking a look at the Hal's Hope from Gulfstream Park on Saturday afternoon. A great betting race. You can go a few different ways in there. Also, before we dive into that, though, want to take a look back because there was no recap edition earlier this week given with the holiday situation. Want to take a quick look at that race down at the fairgrounds, the Risen Star, as well as the El Camino Real Derby. You listen to this in podcasts like most of you, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click the subscribe button. Make sure the bell icon is lit up so you get everything that DRF TV has to offer. If you're over on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, however you get podcasts, write a review, leave a rating. It's always greatly appreciated. Over on YouTube, thumbs up or thumbs down, whatever, your prerogative. Let's dive into those two races. First things first, let's throw up those PPs for War of Will. He is now unbeaten on the main track. Another emphatic score down there at the fairgrounds in the Risen Star. Visually, I like everything about this horse. The tactical ability, the agility that he has to get himself and work out trips. And that was kind of my point when I tweeted about him afterward, after the race. We've talked about it so many times over the past handful of years that good horses can create good trips. They can work out good trips for themselves. And is one of the reasons. Let's just talk about it more from. Oh Jesus, I'm taking out the microphone. Let's talk about it more from a bigger picture standpoint. Is part of the reason that people have a little bit of trepidation when it comes to a horse like War of Will is part of the reason because he's running at the fairgrounds. I mean, let's just be honest. I know the fairgrounds recently, as far as Derby prospects is concerned, hasn't been spectacular, but you have had some good horses ultimately come through that three-year-old ranks down in Louisiana. Whether it was Gunrunner, whether it was Gervin, go a few years back. I know he never ended up being a superstar, but International Star was a nice horse. So, you've at least had some good horses come through the fairgrounds. Now, maybe they haven't gone on to win the Derby, but they've done some good things when it's all said and done. I love everything about this horse, War of Will. From a buyer's standpoint, yes, he regressed by 2 points. He's back to a 92 with this race. But at the end of the day, it's still one of the faster three-year-old races that we have so far. I like the idea that he doesn't have to have the lead, that he can go. And I know he's, in the grand scheme, it was a cushy trip, no question about it. But he powered home. That race completely collapsed. Anybody remotely close to the front end finished up the track. I just thought it was an all-around good effort. And again, this is one of the few three-year-olds right now that I'm impressed by. That I look at him and say, you know what? I could definitely see him winning the Kentucky Derby. Some of these other horses, I'm not so convinced. I talked about it last week on the preview show. The idea is, the recency bias is real. And I'm sure some people will listen to this and think that I'm falling into the recency bias. But like I had said last week, and I've said for a few weeks now, I liked everything about this horse after he broke his maiden on the main track. He looked like a legitimate kind of three-year-old, a potential three-year-old. And here we are. We'll find out. Time will tell. I would imagine the Louisiana Derby is up next. At that point, we're at that point now for a horse like him. You would like him to win the Louisiana Derby, no question about it. But you absolutely can't have a dud. And we are at that point now, especially keep in mind the Louisiana Derby is going to be one of the first 100-point prep races. And it was an exercise I did last year, and I'm sure I'll revisit it coming up here in the weeks to come. I believe since the point system has been implemented, one of the 100-point prep winners has won the Kentucky Derby. So it's almost a bit of a de facto prerequisite that if you don't win one of those final preps, you're probably not really going to have a big chance to win the Derby. I know it's only been around for a few years, but so far, it's batting 1,000. I'm still of the opinion that you don't need to win it just yet, but you got to run damn well. War of Will, he continues on a very, very nice path for Mark Casse and company. As far as the race out west, the El Camino Real Derby at 1 1/8. That's an important piece, I believe. I know it's a synthetic surface, and I know the field behind him was a little bit on the suspect side. But another twist of fate, I tell you what, he looks like a serious runner to me. Let's take a look at that stretch run right now.
Away Kingley, another twist of fate, swings for home, opens up 4 lengths, a 5-length lead for another twist of fate, a 7-length lead as he comes to the 16th pole, and look at this, he is the real deal, another twist of fate. They didn't know if he had the class, but he certainly did. Another twist of fate in a romp here.
Now, there is obvious questions here. Can he do that on dirt? What happens when he faces good horses? So many different things. You saw him swap leads there. That part I'm not super concerned about. I just like to know that the horse has talent. No question about it. Now, maybe he ends up being a grass horse. Maybe he's just a synthetic freak. Maybe he can't run on the main track. The one thing I would throw out to the folks that have brought up, well, he debuted on dirt down in Southern California and he was nowhere. It's a first-time starter. You know, not all of them are going to come out of the box like $1 million. We'd love them all too, but not all of them are. Perhaps this was a horse that just needed a race before we saw his best. But I'll tell you what, based on what he has done in each of these 3 most recent runs, he looks brilliant out there. I love the way that he powers home. And again, perhaps that is a product of the surface that he's running over. But I'm inclined to say, you know what? The interesting thing is going to be to find out. Do they go to a race like the Jeff Ruby Stakes, which is still on synthetic, and then you really won't know what you're dealing with if he doesn't run again? Or do you go to the Santa Anita Derby? Do you go to one of these other races leading into the Kentucky Derby just to find out if he can handle the main track? And you know what? It's almost a darned if you do, darned if you don't situation, because if you go to one of those preps and it doesn't work out, the winner of the El Camino Real Derby got an automatic entry into the Preakness. So they have that to fall back on should they choose to go that route. But maybe an earlier experiment as opposed to later is beneficial for a horse like this, where if you do go and let's just say you go to the Santa Anita Derby and it doesn't work out, you now still can run or try turf anyway. I know he's yet to do it, but you can try to run in a race like the American Turf for the 3-year-olds in the Derby undercard and start plotting your way to the Belmont Derby and that Triple Crown or the triple whatever they call it for the NYRA races now. As opposed to if you wait for your first run to be in the Kentucky Derby, and again, I get it. The Derby is the end-all be-all for people that own 3-year-olds. But to me, I would like to find out before then. I don't want to go just to go. I don't want to have a horse that I don't think can stand up on the main track. I want to go and think that, you know what, maybe we can't win or maybe we can win. Who knows? It's too early to tell one way or the other. But I don't want to go in there questioning, do we even belong here? I want to go in thinking, you know what? If everything goes our way, maybe we can get very lucky and win. At the very least, maybe we can hit the board. Maybe you can give us a thrill, give us a top 5 finish, top 7 finish, something like that. If you do it earlier than later, at least you can sort of plan accordingly if it doesn't work out for him. We'll find out. But I think he's very, very talented. The talent is there. There's no question about it. Question now is he going to be as capable on a different surface? And keep in mind, I say different surface. It's not just the main track. It's grass. Some horses are significantly better on synthetic than they are on turf. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison. So we'll find out what we get. But I'm very encouraged by what we've seen from this horse in his 3 starts up at Golden Gate. Another Twist of Fate might be a name you want to keep an eye on as we go forward here. Let's dive into some handicapping. We're going to go over the 11th race at Gulfstream on Saturday. The Grade 3 Hal's Hope. I think it's a great betting race. You can go 15 different ways in a 9-horse field. Let's throw it to that, and then we'll come back. We'll button things up, get you out of here for the latest edition of Out of the Gate. The Grade 3 Hal's Hope, the main event down at Gulfstream on Saturday. Let's be kind. It's a fun race. It's a good betting race. I don't know how much quality there is in here. Now, keep in mind, they're graded stakes horses, so when I say something like that, it's all relative. Obviously, they're better than $50,000 claimers, but I just don't know that you have any horses, if you're looking forward to one-turn races that are of major sort of consequence. I don't know that you're looking at horses that'll be running in a race like the Metropolitan Handicap here in a few months. You can go a few different ways in here. We'll take them right in order. First things first, over here, as I always do, I take a look and see what do I think it's going to take from at least a buyer standpoint and at least a raw time form standpoint, a 93 and a 113. If you haven't been up into that range, there needs to be reason for me to believe that you can get into that range before I go and want to make you a pick or think about considering you in any kind of a wager. We'll start off with the number 1 horse, Tale of Silence. Now, Tale of Silence is a horse that I had chased for the longest time early on here. I actually picked him in the Tampa Bay Derby in 2017. He came back and it took him a little while, but he actually ran quite well in this Dwyer here, finishing behind Practical Joke at 43-1. We know what Practical Joke was capable of on his best day going one turn. Then last year, his season didn't really get going. He ultimately, started down here at Gulfstream, ran twice, didn't run poorly in either of them. Took a few months off, then came back here in the Westchester at Belmont Park. We're going to take a look at this. Here is Tale of Silence in those familiar silks of Charles Fipke. Up in front here, you've got Conquest Big E, you've got Tommy Macho, and out here you have Cloud Computing, the Preakness winner from a few years back. You can see this half-mile split. They're going sub 46 for horses of questionable, let's say, caliber, and let's just call it for what it is. These are some of the more injury prone horses. Obviously, Cloud Computing was retired. Tommy Macho has not run since this race. We're going to let the tape run. This was a pretty sweet trip in the grand scheme of things for Tale of Silence. Also, keep an eye on Vulcan's Forge coming from way out of it here. They're actually going to finish first and second in this spot. You're going to ultimately see Tale of Silence shoot down toward the inside after splitting horses, and he gets the job done. Dylan Davis, for a moment, it looked like he was going to angle out. Instead, he chooses to go to the rail. Then it's the smart move. Tommy Macho's hanging on his left lead, as he always does, and ultimately, Tale of Silence is just going to get up in time. The dangerous thing here about this race, and we always talk about it, whenever you see a blanket finish, there's reason to question how good the finish actually was and how good the field actually was. Well, when we go back to here and take a look at the PPs, sure, you have the highest last out buyer with a 98 and the highest last out raw time form rating with a 118. Vulcan's Forge came back, his next start in 82 on grass. Tommy Macho has not started since. The fourth and fifth place finishers, including Cloud Computing, they came back to earn buyers of 30 and 71. Needless to say, the Westchester from 2018 has not come back all that strong. Tale of Silence, if you're looking for a fresh face, a horse that didn't come out of the Hooper, I suppose he makes plenty of sense in here. To be honest, I just don't know that I'd take a short price on him in a race like this. Let's move down to the number 2 horse. This is Fellowship. Now, Fellowship, excuse me, comes out of that Fred Hooper, along with 2 other runners, Breaking Lucky as well as Coppertown. Now, Fellowship is another horse that I chased for the longest time, feeling that distance, sort of one turn, 7/8 of a mile kind of races, really his bread and butter. You see right here, I had questioned the quality of the race. This was back basically after the race was over, and I was looking at it for the recap edition. And now, even more so, I do question the quality overall. There's a couple things that you need to take out of this race. Now, when we're going to pick up the replay at this point, Coppertown is nowhere to be found. We'll talk about him more so when we get to his point here in the PPs. But you're going to see right here, the number 4 horse is Breaking Lucky. And on the outside here, in these purple and yellow silks, that's going to be Fellowship at 70-1. Fellowship, for a hot minute, looks like he's just going to absolutely steamroll this field. Keep an eye on Breaking Lucky right here, though. He's not moving well, and ultimately, he is angled out into the clear, and he kind of re-breaks. He bids again and comes at these top horses. Now, Fellowship, I would have liked to have seen him finish the deal in this spot. Look, he's moving pretty well, and I know this is Aztec Sense, who was in great form for Navarro, and he continues to just rattle off big races. But I still thought with that head of steam that Fellowship had, I thought he should have gone by. Meanwhile, here's Breaking Lucky rallying from the far outside, a horse that looked like he was in deep water, rounding the far turn. And you're ultimately going to see Coppertown just kind of plugging along there at the end. Now, why do I look at this and say I question the quality of the field? It has more to do, not so much with the fact that Fellowship was 70-1 in this race. And I know the fourth place finisher here, as I've noted, has came back and he earned a 94 in his next start. That was a horse that ran up at Laurel. I believe it was Unbridled Juan. The bigger concern for me is the the number 4 horse, or the 3 horse, excuse me, the 4 horse in that race, Breaking Lucky. Now, Breaking Lucky, the reason that I'm unsure what to do with this is just not a common sort of running line that you see. When you're a length off of it in second, then next thing you know, you're 6th, 2 1/4 off of it. You're not moving really well. You began the race. You were rather washy on your neck and into your trunk area. You started spinning your wheels on the far turn, only to get out into the clear and come back and almost get the job done. Now, perhaps it's this piece right here. Wet track, he's 0 for 3 over it. Maybe he really just genuinely despises a wet track, doesn't like the slop getting kicked back in his face. If that's the case, then Breaking Lucky is a major player in a race like this because he also brings speed to the table. That's something that there's not a lot of it here in this race on Saturday afternoon. It to me signifies that was not a strong group, considering this horse was basically in deep, deep water on the far turn and still almost came and got the job done. It just kind of my overall feel for the race. I don't particularly love it. We'll talk about Coppertown, though, when we get to him, because he is sort of he would be the horse coming out of that race that I'd be willing to give the benefit of the doubt to. Let's move on to the number 4 horse in here. This is Wild Shot for Rusty Arnold. This is a horse that his career was made on this race right here in the Pate Mile. He goes out there and wins by 4 lengths, just absolutely dusts the field over a wet, sloppy track, a wet sealed track. The concern is now you take a look at it outside of that race. He doesn't have a race fast enough really to win in here. If it comes up wet on Saturday, perhaps he's got a big chance. I didn't like either of these 2 races, his comeback efforts. He was no match for Copper Bullet. And I know he ran into a good horse in Cold Front, or a decent horse anyway, Storm Advisory, Heartwood. but I just wanted to see more out of him. Again, he's the kind of horse that if you don't love what you've seen from these horses that have more recency, perhaps Wild Shot's an alternative, he's not for me. The number 5 horse is Quip. Now, he, to me, is the ultimate fresh face in a spot like this, where he had a little bit of buzz behind him. He ran well in a couple races. He won the Tampa Bay Derby last year. He had enough points to run in the Kentucky Derby. The Connections chose to wait. They wanted to give him plenty of time following the Arkansas Derby. They chose to run him in the Preakness. Preakness, unmitigated disaster. He's put away for quite some time. We're going to go back to his Arkansas Derby. Now, the problem I have with the Arkansas Derby as a whole, when the race was run, I questioned how good the field actually was. And going back and looking at it again, here you have it. Magnum Moon's out here on the front end, and here's Quip, just drawing just to his outside. They're rounding the far turn. Quip is going to have every opportunity to get this job done. You have Solomini coming on the outside. You have Tenfold here. You're hearing names right now that they have not come back to flatter the form of this race by any stretch of the imagination. Quip has every opportunity to go by Magnum Moon, a horse that I didn't think all that much of. And instead, what happens, Magnum Moon actually pulls away from him in the end. It just makes me wonder ultimately how good this horse really is. Now, the flip side, the positive way to look at this horse is to say he was earning low to mid 90 buyers as a relatively early 3-year-old. And now you would just assume naturally with progression and maturation, he's going to take steps forward. And if he does, and he gets into that sort of 100 range or a high 90 range, he is squarely a player in here. You've got Jose Ortiz aboard. He has a little bit of early speed. Rudy Brissett's a nice trainer. There's just a part of me that looks at it and says, again, at a short price, I'm not thrilled with this horse. I think there are other interesting alternatives if you are looking for a fresh face that's probably going to be a better square number than a horse like Quip. Quip can win. I don't want him in here. And you're kind of getting the theme from me with this race. I think it's a fun race. I think any number of these horses can win. I just don't know how good any of them are. And ultimately, from a gambling standpoint, I wouldn't want a short price. Mr. Jordan, look, he's a hard knocker. He's 7 years old. He's won 10 races, as you can see. The elephant in the room right here. He's 1 for 18 lifetime at the Big Gulfstream. He's 8 times second or third. I've long thought that this is actually best for him, 1-turn miles. But then again, you go and look, and some of his best races are going 2 turns at a mile and a 16th. I don't know what you want to do with him at this point. You turn him back coming out of that Sunshine Millions. That clearly didn't work. He loves Gulfstream Park West. That's been well documented. He could win this race. Frankly, I don't love his chances. But again, he's going to be a decent number in here. And if you don't like anybody else, why not take a shot with him? The 7's Coppertown. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about Coppertown kind of separate from Breaking Lucky and Fellowship, as much as I question the quality of the field and the Fred Hooper, you have to give Coppertown the benefit of the doubt, in my opinion. As you can see, I have written in here, and I'm not going to go back and show it to you, but he acted up in the gate prior to the race, and he might have hit his head on the gate. Now, we've joked about it, and there were people on Twitter commenting on it, and I don't remember who they were. I don't mean to snub anyone. It's not that I'm certainly not taking credit for this. I agree with the sentiment that whomever it was tweeting about it. You know, you've got all these other things in different sports, concussion protocol and all that kind of stuff. If this horse did, or there was any question that he potentially could have hit his head on the gate, why the hell wasn't he backed out? Why weren't we allowed to have the vet or someone take a look and make sure that the horse, didn't have kind of scrambled brains there for a couple of minutes, that he wasn't in a fog? That to me, again, we talk about so many things with racing. Racing has a lot of things that they need to get their act together with. This is one of the simpler things to fix. If there's any question, back the horse out, take a look at him. You don't have to go and just spring the gate. Let's be a little bit better with our time, huh? So the reason, again, going back to that, if you do think that there's a chance that this horse popped his head on the gate, clearly he's probably not running with a square head on his shoulders. I kind of look at it and say you give him the benefit of the doubt there. You go back to the Cigar Mile. He didn't have the greatest of starts. He got pinched in between, shuffled back. I didn't think this was really a terrible effort in the grand scheme of things. You can see that I have trouble early, mid-move. He can be excused. After that, you're left with 3 consecutive victories, and they're all sort of in the high 90, low, mid 100 range. Any of those 3 races probably gets the job done in here. Javier retains the mount. I just think, again, if you're taking anyone out of the Hooper, I think it's Coppertown. I think Coppertown's one of the more likely winners of this race. In a way, I look at him as a fresh face because of all this stuff. We'll find out what we get from him. If you get a 3rd consecutive issue where perhaps there's an issue at the start or he doesn't behave in the gate, then maybe you got to wonder if he just doesn't really want to do it anymore. But I don't think we're at that point just yet. He has excuses for each of these 2. Move on to the number 8 horse, Sir Anthony. the upset winner at 25-1 of the Harlan's Holiday. We're going to go back, take a look at that replay here. You can see right now in between horses, you've got, a couple of horses that are decent enough. The real name you want to keep an eye on is this number 1 horse. This was Audible. This was supposed to be a prep for him in the Pegasus World Cup. It was ultimately, and he went to the Pegasus and he ran decent. Not great, but decent. And back here, you have Sir Anthony. Now, Sir Anthony is going to get the dream trip of all dream trips, shooting up the wood. This is a horse that loves a wet track. He's 3 for 4 lifetime. You're going to see how early he is with his lead change. He's already on his right lead. And it's just one of those things that you don't love to see. But at the end of the day, we're not dealing with a superstar here. I can forgive that. Maybe he has a little bit of a physical thing. Meanwhile, on the outside, again, we've gone over this race before. Audible doesn't get the job done. Sir Anthony, with that rail skimming trip, gets it done here at a giant, giant price. Now, the interesting thing here, you can juxtapose the two different speed figures. The buyers, they gave this race a relatively pedestrian rating, which I tend to agree with. But you do see that Audible came back and earned that 94. The 4th place finisher on grass came back and earned an 89, and the 5th place finisher an 85. So perhaps this number is a little bit low. And again, I've talked about it in the past, the difference between the buyer and the time form rating. It's usually about a 20-point differential. You tack 20 onto this 83, you're at 103. You take 20 away from the 115, you're at a 95. All of a sudden, that race, maybe that ends up being a little bit faster. Maybe this race, the Harlan's Holiday, wasn't really as bad as it looked. Granted, he had everything go his way. He really likes a wet track. I would be siding against him in here, but I can understand that there is a little bit of appeal for this horse, given the fact that he is sharp, he continues to improve, and again, there's a real scenario where perhaps this number right here, this buyer of 83, is a little bit on the light side. Now we get to the 9 horse, and ultimately the horse that I landed on. That's Prince Lucky for Todd Pletcher, Johnny V. Prince Lucky, I've never really been a giant fan of. They ran him in the Sunland Derby, just disaster. It was a mess. He didn't, draw a line through it. Sir Barton, he comes back. I don't want to hold that one against him entirely. Off of the layoff, sloppy sealed track for the first time in his career. Faced some decent enough horses. Okay, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. Comes back in the easy goer at Belmont on the Belmont Stakes undercard. We're going to take a look at that replay right now. First things first, you can see that the field, it's decent. It's not great. The runner-up Rugby, his next start, an 84. Dark Vader, a 90. The 6th place finisher, a 91. We're going to go back to the tape, though, and you're going to see this is a very cushy trip, I think, in the grand scheme of things. Throughout the beginning stages, rounding the far turn for Prince Lucky. He's between horses, 3-4 path, this blue hat with the white body. He's going to end up being between horses, between Dark Vader and between Rugby Man as they swing rounding the far turn and into the top of the stretch. The thing that I found most encouraging about this, now again, we've talked about it, and I use Tale of Silence as the example. Generally a blanket finish, not a great thing. You're going to see that more on grass than you were on dirt, just based on the way those races are run. Usually 3 or 4 horses across the wire on the main track, not ideal. You see Rugby Man flailing around on his left lead there. I just like how game Prince Lucky is down between horses. I like the fact that he stays on. Not only does he stay on, but he actually continues to put a little bit of length between he and these other 2 horses. Now, again, it's not a brilliant effort by any stretch of the imagination. He needs to improve from a buyer standpoint. But again, if you take 20 off this 117, the raw rating, that at least puts him more in the mold of a horse that fits from a number standpoint in this race. Something that you have to consider, and I know some people roll their eyes with some of these formulator facts that we roll out. There are certain moves that are always strong for certain connections. I can't remember completely, but I believe the Hollendorfer formulator fact in graded stakes races, second off the bench is usually when they're ready to fire. And it's a big strike rate and it's a big ROI. Here's a move for Todd Pletcher that historically has just been good. There's no other way to put it. Past 5 years, dirt, winner last out, 180-day layoff or greater. He's just under 50%. And we're not talking about like a 4 or 6 sample size. 51 races, 25 winners, 34 of them in the money with a 283 ROI. You add John Velasquez to that equation, 13 for 24, 17 times in the money with just under a $3 ROI. I don't think that can go overlooked. I think in a race like this, where none of them are superstars, if you're like me and you don't love any of them, I want to have a horse that perhaps I haven't seen his best. Keep in mind that race, the Easy Goer, was a 3-year-old race. This is his first start as a 4-year-old. He's been working well. You see these bullets that he's bringing into the race. Johnny V maintains the mount. Again, from a numbers standpoint, if you project forward, he's not that far off. And at the end of the day, this is a formulator fact that I think has some real substance and something that you want to keep an eye on. That's ultimately how I landed on the number 9, Prince Lucky. He has a little bit of tactical ability, breaking from the far outside. I think he tracks tries to go on with it rounding the far turn. Maybe he's not as good as his uncoupled stablemate Coppertown, but I'll take a chance in here at a much better price. That's ultimately where I landed. This is a race where I hate to be, I'm not trying to be mean, but it is what it is. I don't think you have superstars in here. I do think it's a great betting race. It's a fun race. I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's very competitive. But ultimately, to me, I think Prince Lucky has enough positives that outweigh the negatives, including that formulator factor. That's ultimately where I landed in the grade 3 Hal's Hope on Saturday afternoon down at Gulfstream. So there you have it, Prince Lucky for me in the Hal's Hope. And again, that stakes preview, you can find that over on video.drf.com as well as the Racing Forms YouTube channel if you want the opinions from Beer and Illman. If you've been listening live, thanks for doing so. If you've been listening in podcasts, like most of you, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com as well as Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, write a review, subscribe, leave a rating, the whole 9 yards. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can either do it beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Usually keeping an eye on that, seeing what's going on, particularly during the day on Saturday. I will be back with a proper recap edition coming up at the beginning of next week. Not a ton of big races going on this week, so that might be a real lean edition, but we'll find out, and that leads us into bigger and better things next week as we get ready to turn the calendar over into March. And it sounds like there might be a big showdown out in Southern California between Baffert's big horses, Game Winner and Improbable. We'll find out ultimately if that does come to fruition, but you got a number of good things on deck here. We're getting right into the heart of the 3-year-old lead up into the Kentucky Derby. We'll find out if some of these horses start to really separate themselves from everyone else. So best of luck this weekend. However you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. I'm going to button this thing up, and we're going to throw it into the latest edition of Out of the Gate. Talk again, or I will speak anyway, back again at the beginning of next week with the recap edition. This has been the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show.